right, we are going to be talking about 1-2, which is adding and subtracting real numbers. So your target is I can add and subtract real numbers. First thing we're going to talk about is this thing called absolute value. It is the distance. Think about distance. Distance are always positive from 0 on a number line. Distance is always positive. So if you think about it, if you have a number line, 0 is right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, -1, -2, -3. If I said, what's the absolute value? Absolute value looks like 2 vertical lines. Absolute value of -2. Well, I would count there's 1, 2 spaces to 0, so it'd be 2. But if I said, what's the absolute value of +2? I would count there's 1, 2 spaces, so it's also +2. So let's do these. The absolute value of x, well, is just x. The absolute value of +8 is 8. The absolute value of -8 is also 8. You want to treat the absolute value like parentheses and do inside first. So you would get the absolute value of -1, 2 minus 3 is -1, which is just +1. This one right here is special because the negative is on the outside. Technically, this is -1 times the absolute value of 4. Just like your PEMDAS, your P for parentheses, you would also do the absolute value first. So I would do my absolute value of 4 and get -1 times 4, which is -4, which is different from this one because the negative is on the inside. So be careful when it's on the outside or the inside. This one is just the absolute value of -4 is 4. When it's on the outside, really you're multiplying by your -1. On the inside, you just take the absolute value. Now, there's these things called opposites. There are 2 numbers that are opposites if their sum equals 0. For instance, -3 plus 3 equals 0. 2 plus -2 equals 0. An additive inverse is just a number and its opposite. So I would say the additive inverse of 4 is -4. We are going to add real numbers. When you are adding real numbers, there's 2 rules that you have to follow. The first one, if the signs of the number are the same, you will add the 2 numbers and keep the sign they both have. I like to call this same sign sum. So if I had 2 plus 2, well, we know that that's +2, +2. They're the same sign. It would be 4. But if I had -2 plus -2, they both also have the same sign. So I would get -2 plus -2 is -4. However, if the signs are different, you find the difference of the 2 numbers and keep the sign from the larger number. I call this one different difference. So for instance, if I had 2 plus -4, I would really subtract because they're different signs. This is a +2, that's a -4. I always do my big minus my small and keep the sign. So I could change it to 4 minus 2 is 2, but the sign of the larger number is 4, so it's going to be -2. Let's try a couple. The partner is, we are just going to do them together. If I have 1, it's -4 plus -7. They're the same sign. 4 plus 7 is 11. It's negative, so your answer is -11. When you have fractions, you still need to get a common denominator. So I'm going to keep my negative. My common denominator between 4 and 12 is going to be 12. So I have to multiply by 3. So I get -9 over 12 plus, this stays 5 over 12. Your denominator stays the same. It's just going to stay 12. But now when I look at my numerators, negative 9 plus 5, they are different. So what's 9 minus 5? 9 minus 5 is 4. The sign of my larger number is negative. However, you need to simplify that fraction. Always simplify. They're both divisible by 4, so I get negative 1/3 as my final answer. Do not leave a fraction not simplified. Number 3, it says y plus negative 2 for y equals negative 6. This is like 1, 1. You're going to evaluate, which means you have to substitute negative 6 in for y. So instead of writing y, I'm going to write negative 6, and I always put in parentheses when I substitute, plus negative 2. They're the same sign. 6 plus 2 is 8, and it's negative. Go ahead, try these ones on your own, and then you can check them. For number 1, they are different signs. So again, you do big minus small, keep the sign of your largest number. So 5.6 minus 2.3. Your decimal comes straight down. 6 minus 3 is 3. 5 minus 2 is 3. When I look at negative 2.3 or positive 5.6, 5.6 is bigger, so my answer stays positive 3.3. For number 2, you can't have a fraction and a decimal in the same thing. So I'm going to go ahead, and I know that negative 1/5 is really negative 0.2 plus negative 0.1. Well, they're the same sign, so it's negative, and then 0.2 plus 0.1 is 0.3. Number 3, again, we have to evaluate. So I'm going to substitute negative 10 in for x, put it in my parentheses, plus 8. They are different signs, and the sign of my larger number is negative. 10 minus 8 is just 2, so my answer is negative 2. Now, this is a challenge. We've got some absolute value. You need to write down the questions, should be in your notes, and let's go ahead and do it. For number 1, you have to first do inside your absolute value. So you do negative 11 plus 9 is the absolute value of negative 3. Please, you must rewrite it. Your blank in between there. These are the same sign. Negative 1 plus negative 1 is negative 2. Then actually take the absolute values. The absolute value of negative 3 is 3. How does 3 compare to the absolute value of negative 2 is 2? Well, these answers are going to be greater than, less than, equal to, greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to. Well, 3 is greater than 2. Number 2, there's no absolute value, so we can just simply do 3 plus negative 7, different signs, find the difference. 7 minus 3 is 4. The sign of the larger number is negative. How does it compare to 8 plus 2 is 10, the absolute value of 10. Well, the absolute value of 10 is just 10. How does negative 4 compare to 10? It is less than. So the answer to 1 is greater than, the answer to 2 is less than. Now we're going to subtract. When we subtract, it's really not anything new. You first change the operation to addition and change the sign of your second number. What I mean by that, it's always in the middle. So if I had 2 minus 7, you're looking at this middle and you change it to add the opposite. I always say add the opposite. That's why we learned the word opposite. Opposite, it went from positive 7 to negative 7. If I had negative 6 minus 10, I only look at this middle sign and I change it to add the opposite. If I had negative 7 minus a negative 3, I add, and the opposite of negative 3 would be positive 3. So I always make those 2 marks. And then you follow your addition rule because now it's addition. So let's try some. For number 1, I'm going to change only the middle sign. Only the middle. That is really, really, really important. And I change it to add the opposite. So now I have negative 6.7 plus negative 4.1. They're the same sign, so I will sum them. 6.7 plus 4.1 is going to be 10.8, and it's negative because they're both negative. Number 2, the first thing I do is change it to add the opposite in the middle. Now they are both the same sign, but I need to get a common denominator. First, let's make these improper. Remember to make a mixed number improper. You start at the bottom and work your way to the top. 5 times 2 is 10. 10 plus 3 would be negative 13 over 5. Plus negative 10 times 2 is 20. 20 plus 7 is 27 over 10. Now I need a common denominator. 5 and 10 would be 10, so I multiply them both by 2. Then I get negative 26 over 10 plus negative 27 over 10. Well, they're the same sign. I know it's going to be over 10. I know it's going to end up being negative 26 plus 27. Well, let's see here. 20 plus 20 is 40. 20 plus 20 is 40. 6 plus 7 is 13. 40 plus 13 is 53. You could leave your answer like this, or you could make it mixed number, and you could say 10 goes into 53 5 times with 3 tenths left over. And it is a simplified fraction, so you're good. Number 3, we're going to substitute in putting it in parentheses. Negative 11 minus 22. Change it to add the opposite. They're the same sign, so we will sum. 11 plus 22 is 33, and it was negative. All right, let's do these ones. Oh, change it to add the opposite. So now we just add, and they're both positive. That turns out great. 4.5, I think it's easier to add decimals when I write them vertically. Bring your decimal down. 7 plus 5 is 12. 4 plus 1 is 5 plus 3 is 8.2. For number 2, change it to add the opposite. So again, I need to make this a mixed number. 3 times 2 is 6. 6 plus 2 is 8. So we get negative 8 thirds plus negative 5, 6. My common denominator will be 6. So I'm going to multiply by 2, get negative 16 over 6 plus negative 5 over 6. Well, they're the same sign, so we know it's negative. Keep your denominator as a 6. 16 plus 5 is 21. Now you could make this a more simplified fraction. They both are divisible by 3. So you end up with negative 7 over 2. Or you could make it a mixed number. 2 goes into 7 3 times. So you get negative 3 and 1/2. Number 3, let's do our substitution. So we have negative 14 in parentheses. Always put it in parentheses when you substitute. Minus 4. Only change the middle. Add the opposite. Now they're the same sign. Negative 14 plus negative 4 is negative 18. Same sign, you sum them. Now this one we have a nice little word problem. We're going to draw a picture. Suppose that an iceberg extends 75 feet above the sea. We have our sea, we have our iceberg, and we know that from here to here, this is 75 feet. The bottom of the iceberg down here has an elevation of negative 247 feet. It's negative because it's below the sea level. What is the height? Height is the same thing as the distance of the iceberg. So I want to know the total distance. So I need to take the absolute value of that. So I would have 75 plus the absolute value of negative 247 because I know I'm talking about a distance. Distance is your absolute value. So I would have 75 plus 247 is 322 feet. You must label it. You have to label it. Let's just do these last two. I'm going to do it down here. Number 1, if I do inside first, negative 1, change to add the opposite, becomes absolute value of negative 10. How does that compare to the absolute value of negative 10? The absolute value of negative 10 is 10. The absolute value of negative 10 is 10. They are equal. Number 2, we have negative 5 minus negative 6. How does that compare to the absolute value of 8 plus 3? Change it to add the opposite. This time they're different signs, so I find the difference. 6 minus 5 is 1. 6 is my bigger number and it's positive, so it stays positive 1. How does that compare to the absolute value of 8 plus 3 is the absolute value of 11, which is just 11. So 1 is less